Pakistani American Creative Show, Season 3, an episode with Tayyba. All right, Tayyba. So finally you have arrived, and finally we are talking about it. It's been such a long time that we have known each other, but we've never, we have talked about your work, your art, how you have made a name for yourself, but never had the opportunity to kind of share that story with a wider audience. So when I go down the list, even today, ever since I started last year, I can proudly say there's still at least 100 people that I have to go down.
It's amazing.
That list is growing. But tonight we're going to be talking about you. So tell us how you got into writing. Did you get the grade that you wanted in your English class, or were you not that student who could have thought about being a writer?
Oh my God.
What was that journey for Tayyba?
So absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. And this is just an incredible forum. So thank you for doing this and your energy in Houston and I'm sure beyond. So I don't know how you do it, but we're all grateful.
Well, now that you asked about how I do it, I think I have to put this out here, not because Kashif doesn't want to come in front of the camera, but I have to say that it is Kashif and Mazahir and Yasir and Fahad and so many people who are behind.
Wonderful. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. Absolutely. So I think like all writers, I was first a reader. And a very heavy reader. And I was having this conversation off camera earlier, but I grew up in Dubai at a time when there were no libraries. And so I kind of cleaned out my school library and then had to end up at the British Council. Anyway, so I've always been a reader, but you were just speaking with the really inspiring Shahid Rahman. And like her, I'm a scientist too. So I actually studied mathematics in college. And in grad school, went into tech consulting, but your love for literature never leaves you. And I think with every artist has always had an inner appreciation in them for whatever art form they might eventually blossom into. I also think you need to have lived life to truly make meaningful art.
Right.
And so I know there's a lot of great young writers out there, but I'm going to say you guys hang in there. You're going to make better work 20 years down the road. So I did always keep on writing during, career, raising a family, but it was a bit ad hoc, more for my pleasure. But I think you hit a point in your life when your art can just kind of bubble up and take over. That happened to me at a time when I also had to cut back on some of my other professional involvements for various reasons. And, but you can't sit still like I could never sit still. And I think that only enhanced my art because I couldn't just be at a desk writing. So I found myself very involved in Houston's writing community and beyond. And, reading lit journals, continuing to read contemporary work, but also going to some pretty large writing conferences, meeting with other writers. And that just keeps inspiring you. I think also probably when things really gelled for me as far as what I wanted to do, and my first major project that came up was by encountering, you read Jhumpa Lahiri, she's great, inspired Chitra Divakaruni, who's actually my personal mentor now, I'm so grateful for. And then I started reading some wonderful Pakistani contemporary writers, and I think that's when everything kind of opened up and I knew what I wanted to write. So Mohsin Hamid's work, and Kamila Shamsi. I absolutely have to say Muhammad Hanif was what did it for me in the end. His book, A Case of Exploding Mangoes, hilarious, bold,
Right.
no holds barred.
Yeah.
And when I read that, growing up as a woman in Pakistan and as a young girl, you feel silenced very often. You feel like you can't say things.
Very much.
And reading Muhammad Hanif's book, my jaw was on the floor half the time. Like, how did he just said that?
He just said
that, man. And I just felt like I could say that. There is a lot of comfort too in being in the U.S. where We have, the freedom of speech.
Yeah, a lot of
It's
freedom.
pretty serious.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I managed to do that. And so a lot of my work is now coming from that space.
So tell me a little bit about the culture. After all, we are all, from Pakistan.
Yeah.
So how did that beginning of your life in science and technology and then taking on to this, any resistance from your family, your parents, your people around you, or
Not
everybody was chilled?
I think they were pretty satisfied by my earlier accomplishments. And then now I can do this. No, I don't think they would have objected earlier either. But honestly, this is advice I give to a lot of younger folks who are looking to get into the arts. And I advise them to think about their art in two ways. There is your creative, sort of what you want to say in the world, but there's also your craft. And if you are determined to build a career in the arts, I would say don't be ashamed of using your craft to make a living, right? So you could be writing, if you want to be a writer, you could write in practical ways, be a journalist or write. And then you could also be writing your books. And I think sort of this dream of just being a creative artist when you're 23 is probably not practical unless you come from a lot of privilege, which a lot of immigrant families don't. I think that's a vision from the time of the British lords who, I don't know, their sons, maybe their daughters didn't need to work and they could write at home. That doesn't happen. Nobody writes at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. So, what kind of subject matter that you have so far dealt with, and what are in your, like, for instance, when I was talking to a lot of actors, they have this thing that we have our boundaries as to what we can or don't want to do.
Right.
Is that something for writers also? Are there topics that writers think twice about writing?
I think that might be more internal. I think there is a lot of, I think the most challenging kind of writing possibly might be if you were writing memoir or explicitly writing autobiographically. I think it's very hard in our, we can't say, I don't care what my mom thinks about this. Right. You can't just go out there and write a memoir about your mother. Just, that is more easily done in this culture. I mean, you could. But I think fiction is really powerful. It can be abstract. It can be expressive. You can always say it's just a story. And, your story means some things, but you can say, did I really say that? I think you're reading that into it. So I am not afraid of writing anything. I don't believe in gratuitous writing. There's TV shows, for example, that have gratuitous content just for the sake of the thrill.
Just for the sake of it.
I'm not interested in watching those shows either. I always want my brain to be challenged. I want to think about what it means to be a person in this world and in our times. And so that's what I write too. So primarily a lot of my, I don't know what my future projects will be, but as sort of my wellspring of my first serious set of stories came up, I write short stories. I have a novel in progress, but short stories, the form is just what I love. I don't know why, they just come to me and they come out. But my first set of stories started coming out based on my family stories, little nuggets of conversations that I had heard that nobody would talk about. The aunt in the village who was killed, little family secrets. And even I don't know enough about it. I don't know the whole story. And I think that's what makes for a better piece of fiction, because I had these questions that I got to explore in this work that I'm doing. So, a few of my stories are over there, starting from that place. I did grow up in Dubai, as I mentioned, been in the U.S., growing up and working, having a family, and now growing old. And so a lot of my other work is set in the Pakistani diaspora in the U.S. And that's something I'm really excited about because, and I mentioned Jhumpa Lahiri, I love her work, but there was a whole trend of writing as in this setup where immigrants are struggling,
Right.
to fit in. But I think we're past that narrative for the current generation. I feel like I'm past that narrative. I didn't experience the kind of struggle possibly people did in the 80s or 70s. Some people still do. I don't want to deny that. But there's a whole other narrative of settled Pakistanis who live here, who have their Pakistani culture, but are also American. Right?
Yeah.
Pakistani American. And so that's the context I write a lot of my stories in that are set. And I've got stories set in Hillcroft and stories set in Sugarland and in downtown. So
Yeah.
I have a whole series of stories set in Houston.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you bring up a very good point that somehow जो हम दूसरे immigrants के साथ अपने आप को compare करते हैं, ये compare हो जाते हैं because we're also immigrants. So एक immigrant story हमेशा attach होती है हमारे साथ कि and a lot of people in our community have this thing. I came to America with $100 and I have this, right? Yes. So, or I didn't have, car to go to my work or whatever. But I think now that will always be there for anyone who immigrates to any new place. Right. You have challenges. But I think, and as you rightly said, the focus should shift on now, what's your life now? Yeah. Done with those struggles, done with those things that you have to do now. Right. What are you thinking now? And I think that's a picture of the Pakistani American diaspora that needed the word American in it. Right. Otherwise, we would just be Pakistani.
Exactly. And I think what's really interesting about that space too is that if you truly understand your culture, which I hope I do, then there are tensions. There are micro tensions about living in this space as Americans, right? One of the stories I'm very fond of deals with the idea of how we deal with disabilities and family members with disabilities. Right. And back home, even now, even in my immediate family, there are situations where people with disabilities are hidden, or the disability is considered shameful, or it's assumed that you don't have a future prospect. And so I have a story that has a child with a disability who, kind of hopefully breaks the stereotypes or pushes back against that cultural norm. And there are people in our environment who are both supportive and not. And I really just wanted to explore what that's like, informed by our culture and our values.
Yeah. No, wonderful. I think I was just telling you before we started recording that there's a lot of focus now on mental health. Yeah. There's a lot of focus on ridding our society of those stereotypes and those biases and those misunderstandings, misconceptions about different illnesses and how so I think that when we attach the American to the Pakistani, I think that's when we realize that what are the areas that as a community we never paid much attention to. Right. And because of being in a different country, different environment, different society, we get to see that other side of it, right, which otherwise we would not have. Right. Wonderful. So, so I asked every writer, this is one of my pet peeve questions, any of your work slated for screen?
For screen, not yet, but I would be open to a conversation about it. Yes, I do. I mean, most of my work is short stories. I am working on a novel, which I'm trying to make famously difficult. I don't think it can be written as a screenplay, so that's a challenge to somebody. It's pretty experimental.
I think we have a screenplay writer in our midst. Yeah.
I'd love to see somebody turn that into a linear story. Well, maybe screenplays don't have to be linear, but
it doesn't have to be linear. I think, in fact, I am working on a story with another writer friend of mine, and boy, is it not. It's not linear. Yeah. It goes in all different directions, and I am waiting for that product to come out into the open on the screen and see how audiences react to that. Because we're all fashioned for just a very linear way of storytelling that this happened, that happened, and we never sometimes go back to why it happened. Right. And these kind of stories go back and forth in that. Right. Wonderful. And so tell us, as you know, time just goes by so fast when you're having an interesting conversation. What is it that you're working on for the future? Are there any plans? I know you're working on your novel. What else is in line for Tayyba?
So definitely keep writing. but I also feel like you can't write in a vacuum. So one of the things that is very important to me is being involved within the artistic power structures of this country. So there are gatekeepers with agents and with publishers and with editors, and you've got to get in there. So I have gotten into editing. I edited Gulf Coast Journal. I was the fiction editor for a couple of years. And now that I've rolled off that, I've joined Conjunctions, which is another incredible literary journal up in Bard. So being in that space and that experience has been incredible for me because I managed to pluck stories that had been submitted that I feel like other readers on the team would have glossed over because they don't have the cultural context.
Absolutely.
I found published stories of an Afghan queer writer and an Arab American writer up in Michigan. And it's, there's a certain diction and a way of thinking when people whose first language is not English, even when they write English fabulously, it's almost like it's coming from a space of translation because you are translating in your head what you're... It is. That's how it comes out. And I feel like people who are not familiar with that culture won't pick it up. And so just championing that work. So I'm really excited. And even just work, like there's a Chinese American writer, it's just work that comes from a space that's different from the traditional white space. Even in my program, I just wrapped up my MFA at the University of Houston, just reading broadly and seeing the difference between sort of what's considered classic literature, which is often Western inflected, right? And changing that narrative to bring in different ways of telling a story. There's sentiment, for example, is not valued in Western writing as much, but we're all sentiment. That's all we are.
I think sentimentality, maybe not in literature, but on a screen, it's everywhere.
On screen, but even in literature, right? It's why be afraid of it? It's only a cultural fear, right?
Absolutely.
Sentiment too is something that we value. I mean, there's a reason we cry when we read a story that moves us, right? And it's not just sort of dry suburban literature or something like that.
Right. And I think the fear is just of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't know something,
exactly.
So
we've got to get ourselves into those spaces. So I really, and encourage other Pakistani writers of color to just get into these other spaces. Don't just sit and write.
Yeah.
Go be an editor somewhere. Go read. Be a reader at a journal. I've been very involved with Inprint Houston, teaching for them. So I've been teaching at the medical center through them, at the Texas Medical Center, and that has been fabulous. Really connected with sort of the staff there, the doctors and radiologists, and sort of and the medical residents, sort of helping them get in touch with their creative and perceptive side, which is very missing from their careers. And that enriches me. I mean, the stories I hear at the Med Center, I don't hear anywhere else.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I think for a very long time, we have kind of just thought that science is science and art is art.
Yeah.
But there are so many areas where these things intermingle.
Yeah, people ask me, wow, how'd you go from math to writing? And I'm like, it's exactly the same thing because math is patterns. Storytelling is patterns. You recognize a pattern and you see a story in it, right? It's sort of, stories have shapes, you see rhythms in them. It's, sort of there's a musicality that connects math and storytelling. Yeah. So there's that, and then getting connected with various writing communities also helped me. I will be, and this is something I'd love people to come out to, but in September, Jaipur Lit Fest is coming to Houston, and Chitra Divakaruni's new book, Independence, just got released this year. So I get to interview her on stage. So come on out and let's hear about her book. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It's be really exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us so much information in such little time. But also, I think this question is sometimes, on people's mind is, share some with us about challenges, being a working mother, being a working person, taking time out of your family. What are those challenges that you can help a new person understand and realize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all work differently as artists. you need different kinds of space. So first of all, recognizing what you need. So some people can work in 20-minute spurts and be creative. And if you're that kind of person, I would say find those 20 minutes every day consistently. Creativity kind of shows up when you show up. So if you're in the same place at the same time every day, it's going to come. Just give it, so if you can do that. I think we also have to be realistic. Some of us don't work in 20-minute spurts. So I, for example, putter around for an hour before I can start writing.
Oh, yeah.
And then, I write for 3 hours and then I have to phase out. It's you have to recognize that about yourself. So that also means that I can't, in my daily sort of hubbub, find that time to actually write. So I fill it with these other writing adjacent activities. I do need to find, time on the weekend, for example, 4 hours for myself, going away to retreats, taking a week out. If you're in academia, maybe your summers are free and you dedicate your summers to that. But making time for yourself, somehow or other is what it takes.
It's necessary.
It's necessary. And I feel like, our art can sometimes well up so much. There's so much discontent because we're like, I wish I could write and I don't want to do all this other stuff. I don't think that's productive. I feel like you have to embrace your entire life because you are who you are in the situation you are. You love your family. I hope. You got to earn money. And really that is 99.99% of the people in the world, and artists are no different. So just make peace with it.
Yeah.
But also recognize what you need to work within that, and very intentionally carve out the space according to your needs.
Absolutely.
And it might be slow. There are seasons for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what social media has done, or these devices have done, is made us more impatient.
Yes.
We want things to happen
Yeah.
right away.
Right.
And
They don't.
in most cases, most creative ideas don't just
They don't.
happen right away.
No.
On your time,
Right.
especially.
Exactly. And when you do have a small bit of time for yourself, but you can't do your actual creative work, engage with it somehow, right?
Yeah.
Read a book instead, but go out to the museum, make contacts, whatever it is. Just stay engaged with it, and that'll keep your brain firing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful advice for our listeners and everybody. And I'm just ecstatic that we got to do this.
Thank you so
and
much. It's a pleasure.
inshallah, we'll do it one more time.
Inshallah.
Hopefully this year.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for sharing your story. And we'll definitely see you one more time.
Thank you, Shahid.
Thank you.
Pleasure.